Testing. Hello, Ms. Meyer, how are you? How are you? Good, good. All right, good. Hang it in there. Fortunately, we got the appeal for the HBC is continued. Yeah, except they spent it because I see that the notes below. We didn't do. The thing was that fixed, so I kept mine so I could read it. Yeah, I read this Tuesday before I saw it was adjourned. Did you read the whole thing? Yes.
In compliance of the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided. If any member has reason to believe this meeting is being held in violation of this act, they should state so at this time. Seeing none, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Here.
Mr. Murray,
Here.
Mrs. Werner, Ms. Hessel,
Here.
Mr. Ledwin,
Here.
Mrs. Notch,
Here.
Mr. Walsh,
Here.
Mrs. McDade,
Here.
Mr. Venuto.
Here.
Thank you.
We need a resolution, I'm not with it today, a motion to approve the minutes of the July 28, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Murray, seconded by Ms. Hessel. Ms. Hessel?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Ledwin?
Yes.
Mrs. Notch?
Abstain.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mrs. McDade?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We need a motion to approve the resolution for Paul and Barbara Griziato at 1502 Venuto Avenue. Somebody make that motion.
Motion.
Thank you.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Mrs. McDade, seconded by Mr. Ledwin. Ms. Hessel?
Yes.
Mr. Ledwin?
Yes.
Mrs. Notch?
Abstain.
Mr. Walsh?
No.
Mrs. McDade?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mrs. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Our first application tonight is Cape May Sea Glass Properties at LLC at 933 Beach Avenue. Hey, Drew, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello, everyone. Andrew Catanese on behalf of the applicant, Cape May Sea Glass Properties, LLC, and its principal members, Bonnie and Sean Wilhelm. Mrs. Wilhelm is here with me to my left. Also with us is our project engineer, David Scheidig. Our presentation tonight will be brief. Most of you will remember that approximately a year ago, this board granted preliminary and final site plan approval for this project, which generally includes renovations, reduction of the number of units from what was 11 down to 7, and an increase of the off-street parking. There used to be 3 on site, there will now be 8. The zoning board's resolution imposed a condition that required the property owner to record a deed restriction on the property that prevented any subsequent condominium conversion absent a later site plan and amended site plan review to this board. It did so specifically with reference to addressing coordination between the structures with respect to parking. Now, the owner's plans for the building is unchanged as it was last year, to hold on to it, keep it for themselves. However, we'd like to get that cloud off of the title, because right now that, with the deed restriction, it basically impairs the property in the public record. So we have submitted a revised plan that basically assigns parking spaces. Mr. Scheidig will speak very briefly to that, and we're hopeful that that will alleviate the board's concerns as to the coordination between the buildings on parking, and then we'll take any questions you have. I know Mr. Scheidig has been qualified as an expert before the board before. If we could have him sworn and recognized as an an expert in engineering and planning, we'll move right to him.
I do the swearing, but the chairperson accepts him as an expert. So-
Oh, I accept him.
Okay.
I remember.
Please raise your right hand. Is your client going to testify, Mr. Catanese?
We can swear her, we don't plan any.
We're also going to have Mr. Hurlis be sworn in as well, board engineer. Each of you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Great, thank you. Mr. Scheidig, you had prepared the original site plan for this project, correct?
I did.
And of course, as part of the prior approvals, there were a number of conditions. And had those plans been finally conformed to the prior approvals and approved by the city?
They have.
And in fact, the conformed plans that match the approvals granted last year have been submitted to and been signed off upon by Mr. Hurlis, correct?
That's also correct.
All right, now we submitted a set of plans for this application. Could you describe in total the differences between what's already approved and being constructed right now and the plans the board has before them tonight?
Sure. These plans we have before you tonight are exactly the plans that were signed off on as compliance plans as completed. The only thing we did was to label the parking spaces. As Andrew Kennedy says, there's 7 units. We have 8 on-site parking spaces. All we did was label those parking spaces so that they could be identified and assigned to each one of the units.
And to the extent that that assigns a parking space to each unit, does that create coordination between the building as to parking, in your opinion?
Yes, it does.
And in light of the limited scope of the changes to the previously approved plans, do you believe a site plan waiver is appropriate?
Yes, it does.
That is our presentation. And we're, of course, happy to answer any questions you have.
We're just trying to find the plan.
Page 2.
So if I recall from, this is Mrs. McDade, if I recall from your prior presentation, one of the conditions that we were concerned about was the parking, a gate, an electronic gate, and that there would be no ability for people to be parking in the driveway. I mean, you know, the conformity that we agreed to really, you know, the HPC was not happy with us doing that, and we agreed to it with those conditions. I'm a little concerned that now now we're coming back to this after a condition of not making it a condominium at any point in time. How will that standard or that, you know, threshold be kept safe? I mean, one of the issues may be in the future, you've got 1 parking space per condo and 1 guest parking space. how are you going to restrict that condo members, independent people, are going to then be not adhering to something that was set forth as a condition and which we, gave as an approval against really what the HPC's design standards, what they had hoped and expected?
May I?
Go ahead. Absolutely, yeah.
First and foremost, there was never a condition that the property can never be converted to condominium. What it said was that if it ever is to be converted to condominium, it should return to the board to deal with the coordination between the buildings as to parking. To your second question, there's no difference.
No, back to the first question. But you're now coming to us, asking us to remove that condition, which, Mr. King, please help me understand. If that's removed, then at no point in time does the property have to come back before the board for approval.
I'll answer that, but then can I add
Okay.
to it a little bit?
Sure, absolutely.
The answer to that is correct. We do not have to come back again for approval. But there's something going on here that might not be immediately obvious. You have to treat what we call fee simple, like where regular ownership and condominium ownership identically in identical circumstances, okay? So if you have a building that is 5 units in a building, you can't deny something for it because it's a condo as opposed to being all owned by one person, like an apartment, all right? There's a law that says you can't discriminate against condominiums, all right? So if you're going to deny something for becoming a condominium, you have to have a reason that is different than the reason that would exist if it were all owned by one person. In the last hearing, there was an objector, and the objector's concern was he didn't want it to be a condominium. And if this were just a regular apartment building, you may feel that way, but there's nothing you can do about that, okay? But in this instance, the board felt that there was something they could do about it in the sense that this was a bit unique because there were 2 different structures. And the parking, it sounds very clear now, but at the time, the parking was very confused because we didn't know if there was going to be parking underneath because I had to go back to the HPC, and we didn't know what was going to be underneath. We weren't even sure how many spaces could fit. There was like 4, maybe 5. It was all back. So the parking was kind of a mystery. So what we did at the time was, partly to accommodate the concerns of the objector, but also because of the parking, we said, we're going to make a distinction in this instance, because if it's all owned by one person, that one person controls where everybody parks. But if it's condos, and there isn't a clear understanding of how many spaces there are and where they are, it could be a madhouse. So we had a reason to distinguish between single ownership and condo that, to me, didn't violate the statute, because the parking was controlled different for the 2 uses, okay? But now, that is kind of fixed. All right, we now know where the parking is going to be. The HPC thing is resolved, that there's some rigmarole that's resolved, and now you can see where the parking is. So if you're inclined to deny this, you have to articulate a reason why the parking situation would be different if they do this than if it was all owned by one person.
Understood.
And that would be, in my opinion, somewhat challenging to do. It's possible, I'm not foreclosing it, but I would need you to articulate it, because the same thing that an owner could do, you could do in a master deed. And I presume in their master deed, if they did condominiumize this, they will acknowledge now that they would accept as a condition that any master deed in a condominium would require this exact parking arrangement that would be approved tonight. So I'm not sure I can really say that you're making that it would be different if we're single ownership. There's 7 units, there's 8 spots, 1 for each unit, and then an extra spot. There's not a lot that can be done there, okay? But I allow for the possibility that you could have, I know in Smithfield or something, maybe there's something here when you first come over the bridge, but it's not in Cape May, where there's like all these little houses around. And if someone wanted to condominiumize that, that might be different than having it all under one ownership, coordinating where the parking is and how it's used. And I can envision differences when there's multiple buildings on one site and you're trying to figure it out. But they've kind of, now that we've got the parking understood, I would say that to defend your decision to deny this, you would have to articulate a reason why doing this in a condo would be different than if it was under single ownership. And I'd have to hear that, and then you'd have to give your reasons, and then you vote, and if they don't like it, they can appeal, but you need to give the reasons, because that's the standard that you'd have to apply, in my opinion, okay? So that's why what they're doing is it's not one of those things where, we had a big hearing and we gave a condition. And the condition was, don't ever put a deck on top of this porch, and then we grant it. And then 3 months later, come back and then we'll put a deck on. This isn't that. This is, we had a specific problem, couldn't be totally fixed at the time, the objector had a concern. So all we said was, if you're gonna do this, come back so we can look at what you're gonna do and then revisit it, okay? I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, but I think it needed it a little bit. So, Ms. Guyanese, did I articulate that in a sensible way?
I think you did, and I think you actually answered Ms. McDade's second question, which is how does it work in terms of control? It's through the condo association, which can control just the way the owner can. And the one other comment was, I think you had indicated, now you're asking us to remove the condition, and in some sense, but we're asking it to be removed as satisfied. We're back here to
And
satisfy the condition.
Mr. King's explanation has provided that, so.
Anybody else have any questions?
No, condominiums are permitted in this particular area, right?
Well, you don't really permit condominiums. It's just, that's the form of ownership.
Right,
It's the
but I mean,
use. But this use is, well, see, that's why I have some, this isn't the situation to make that law, but there could be a situation where, see, this is 2 buildings on a single lot, and it's kind of like not totally a permitted use in that sense, but it is a permitted use. I mean, it's a bed and breakfast, hotel, apartments, whatever it is.
Multifamily.
Multifamily. Those things are apartments, multifamily, and condos. It's hard to really to discriminate between those 3. You kind of get in trouble when you start doing that. So, but this is a permitted use.
Okay, and there's no legal impediment to removing this condition, right? No legal impediment?
Now, you foresaw, your resolution kind of foresaw this conversation in a sense.
Okay.
That they may someday, if they were gonna make it a condo, they had to first come back here and explain to the board how the parking was gonna work, because that was a bit confusing at the time if it wasn't in single ownership, and that's what they're doing now. So I agree that it's not so much removing a condition as it is fulfilling an obligation imposed by the condition, which was to come back here and explain it, and that's what they're doing.
Okay, and the way the resolution read it, at first I thought, well, they were going to come back before they converted to condo, but they don't have to do that. I mean, they're just coming back, as you say, to remove this as a,
It may never be a condo.
yeah, exactly. Okay.
There's no plan. We want to get that cloud off the title.
Okay, I understand.
And you would put this in the master deed, assigned parking in any master deed?
I think it's now a condition of the site plan, just like
I think
anything
it is too,
else.
But I'd like to have that, I'll put those words
In the resolution, that's fine.
Okay? That way we make sure we.
Yeah, now it's so much better, because now we can actually see it. Should I open it to the public? Or Craig? Let Craig talk.
Okay, quick summary of my July 15th, 2022 review memorandum. Rich did a great job of explaining the condition that is being, the modification of the condition that was requested. My reading of the board was that condition was set because of the common elements, which were the parking spaces. And that parking plan has evolved through this process between the HPC, between this board, et cetera. We now have designated parking spaces for each unit with one surplus that will be a guest flexible parking spot. So for that reason, I didn't see any, I don't object to any, removing this condition. I did recommend that the one space that's not marked be labeled as guest parking space. And all of the other conditions are just simply to comply with the conditions of the previous approval. So if there are no questions, that's my summary.
Let's keep it simple. All right, this time I'll open up to the public. Anybody within 200 feet would like to comment? Beyond 200 feet? All right, it's closed to the public.
Just
Back to you.
one, because we did get all the reports from the other governmental departments, there was some dialogue between the fire department. Originally was a recommendation to not approve. That is subsequently be amended in an August 24th memo that recommends approval. All of the other Public Works, Shade Tree Commission all supported this application. So I just wanted to make that part of the record.
All right.
So unless there's some discussion, the motion I recommend being made is a motion to grant amended preliminary and final site plan approval, a waiver of site plan requirements, and whether we call it removal or satisfaction of the condition regarding the condo. That condition will be removed, and they will be treated as any other property, like a condo, if it's permitted, otherwise. They follow all the rules that relate to condos. Okay? So that's the motion I recommend being made, but how you answer, how you vote is up to you. But if you're going to vote against it, remember the standard I asked you to apply. Okay?
Okay, entertain a motion, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make the motion as articulated by our counsel.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Murray, seconded by Mrs. McDade. Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mrs. Notch? Mr. Ledwin? Ms. Hessel?
Yes.
Mrs. McDade?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Okay, our next application is Cape CJ LLC at 1301 Beach Avenue.
Before we do that one, I just want to, for the record, announce that the application that was to be heard for Locale Stockton LLC at 5 Stockton Place, Block 1064, Lot 17, is not being heard tonight. It was adjourned at the request of counsel for the HPC, who had a different engagement. So it was by the consent of those two parties, the applicant and HPC, they requested the adjournment, which was administratively granted. That will now be heard at the next board meeting on
October 27th.
I'm glad I read that transcript. October 27th, 2022. There will not be any further notice. This is your notice, so if you intended to speak on that application, you need to appear at that date at this time and say what you'd like to say. All right? Thank you.
Let me start over. I didn't have my mic on. I apologize.
You have a good voice.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Robert Belasco. I'm an attorney at the law offices of Stefankowitz and Belasco, located in North Wildwood. I'm here tonight with the applicant, Cape CJ LLC, who's represented tonight by the principal of Cape CJ LLC, Jeff Granitis. I also have with me here tonight Joe Ross. Mr. Ross is a registered architect in the state of New Jersey. The subject property is located at 1301 Beach Avenue. It's also known as Block 1146, lots 26.02, 7, and 28. Many of you are likely familiar with the property. It's currently developed with a 9-unit guest house and restaurant that operates under the trade name of the Peter Shields Inn and Restaurant. Many of the board members will also likely recall that back in May of 2021, the applicant was before the board. The applicant obtained a D2 expansion of a nonconforming use variance because the site itself contains a nonconforming use. Now, it's interesting because guest houses are permitted uses in the C3 zone, as are the ancillary restaurant in this situation. But your zone limits the square footage of the restaurant use to 25% of the structure, and in this situation, the restaurant takes up a total of 37%. So we exceed that which is permitted pursuant to your ordinance, and a D2 variance is again necessary tonight for the relief that we're seeking. Back in May of 2021, the applicant appeared before this board and obtained preliminary and final site plan approval in addition to that D2 use variance and some building setback variances to construct a patio, an outdoor dining area for use by guests of the inn as well as patrons of the restaurant. The board did vote to approve all the variances on the night in question, and that resolution, or that relief, was memorialized in Resolution 06-24-2021:1. The applicant proceeded with construction, and at the time that the construction was commenced, the applicant, Mr. Granitis, had the idea to possibly install a fire pit in the patio area. He thought it would be a nice outdoor amenity for use by patrons as well as the general public who visits the restaurant. It would provide a nice amenity for individuals who are waiting for a table or for in-guests who wanted to enjoy some outdoor space while they were staying on site. Mr. Gurnitis applied for and obtained all requisite permits from the City of Cape May's Construction and Zoning Office, and he proceeded with the construction of that fire pit. At some point in time, it's our understanding that a complaint was received from a member of the public. The construction official, or the zoning official rather, contacted Mr. Gurnitis and asked him to stop work on the fire pit. And at this juncture, the fire pit's essentially been completed. The only element that remains to be completed is to actually physically connect the gas line to the gas service on site. So this was a fully permitted amenity, and when we received the stop work order, we knew we had to apply to this board. Ironically, the City of Cape May's ordinance is silent with respect to fire pits. I understand that there's been some internal discussions at the city council level in terms of possibly implementing some regulations, but my review of the ordinance seems to indicate there's nothing on file currently at this juncture. So we applied for variance relief for the building setback along Trenton Avenue to the patio and to the fire pit, and we are also asking for a building setback variance on Beach Avenue to the patio as well. And I'll explain in a little bit more detail. Mr. Gurnitis and Mr. Ross will both testify to these points as well. But the patio, when it was originally approved, it was permitted to extend approximately 7 feet into the Trenton Avenue setback and 20 feet into the Beach Avenue property line setback. When construction took place, Mr. Gurnitis hired 2 different masonry contractors, one to build the retaining wall, which you currently see on site, and another masonry contract to lay the pavers and to do all the brickwork. At an as-built survey done, we discovered that the patio itself was built approximately 11 inches larger on the Beach Avenue and Trenton Avenue property, sides of the property. Incidentally, the retaining wall is built in the exact location that this board approved. And the retaining wall doesn't necessarily require any variance relief because it's less than 2 feet. It's essentially exempt from the setback requirements in this situation. So the relief that we're seeking with the patio is essentially the space between the edge of the retaining wall and the start of the patio, the paver patios. That's what I would refer to as the landscape buffer. It's smaller than this board approved. We believe that it's a minor deviation from the plans that were approved, and Mr. Ross will testify to that effect. So I know it's a little more long-winded, more than I usually am when I come before this board, but this is a little bit of a unique application, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone was up to speed on the history and how we got here. So with that said, Madam Chair, I do have Mr. Gurnitis and Mr. Ross here tonight, if they could be sworn.
All right, do each of you, Mr. Harless remains under oath. Do each of you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And Madam Chair, I believe Mr. Ross has been before this board several times in the past. I could certainly elicit his credentials if you'd like me. Would the board be willing to accept him as an
Yes.
expert? Thank you very much. So at this time, I'm going to ask you, Jeff, if you could explain to the board what went on here. So obviously, you were here in May of 2021, and you obtained approvals to build this patio. Can you describe what went on during construction and how this patio ended up being 11 inches larger than what was approved?
Somebody made a mistake, that's all. And probably not the surveyors, because the surveyors came back and did a as-built survey, and they would have discovered that mistake if it was theirs. But and it was probably the bricklayer between the retaining wall, that 2-foot retaining wall, and where the patio pavers lay. You know, we have a landscape garden in there. There's little shrubs, boxwoods that go around. And it looked a little bit smaller than it was supposed to be. And then sure enough, when we did the as-built survey, we found out that the pavers encroached on that space by 11 inches on 2 of the dimensions.
And you're before this board tonight asking for variance relief to maintain that condition as it exists today, correct?
Yes.
Are you proposing to include any additional outdoor seats in the slightly enlarged patio area?
No.
And I think it's important to note, you would acknowledge that in the resolution that was adopted by the board, 06-24-2021:1, there was a condition which limited you to 80 seats, correct?
Yes.
And that's 80 seats whether they're inside of the restaurant or they're outside on this patio.
Correct.
Now, with respect to this fire pit, obviously that wasn't included on the original plan that was approved by this board. Take us through the process that led to the idea to construct this fire pit and what it adds to the site.
So we're constructing the patio, and I said it was approved for both in amenity and restaurant amenity. So I talked to the guys that we're building, and I said, let's put a fire pit on here, and let's go down to the construction office and get our permits. So we filed, we got a building permit, we got a plumbing permit for the gas, we got the electrical permit because there's a wire run out to it. We went to the fire board or whatever it is, we got their permission, and we waited for the permits. The permits were issued, we started construction.
Where's the fire pit stand currently in terms of construction?
Well, it's everything except the gas line was hooked up. When, surprisingly, because everybody from the town came out and inspected. All the inspections were done too. The gas line was inspected, everything was inspected. And we were set to make the final gas hookup with the special turn-off box, emergency turn-off box. And I got a call from Skip, the zoning officer, and he said, I want you to stop work on this. And I said, why? And he said, you have to go back to zoning. And I probed a little bit and found out that somebody around the corner complained about it. I still don't understand why. I never talked to us about the use of the patio. And so we stopped. I talked to Lou Vito, and I talked to the town manager, Mike Ball, and I said, look, Mike, there's just a couple little touch-up things we have to do on this because it's going to take time to get the final approval for this, and I don't want to leave certain parts of the fire pit exposed to the elements. And they said, go ahead, touch up those. And I said, but I do promise I will not hook up to the gas line. And I held that promise. We're not hooked up to the gas line.
So never been turned on at this juncture?
Never been turned on.
How do you envision this fire pit being utilized by the in-guests and by the general public who eats at your restaurant?
I think that the paranoia came because they thought this was going to be an open, public, whatever party drinking spot, and it's not. No one is going to be on that patio unless they're an in-guest with a reservation or they've made a dinner reservation. So it's very limited use. We've been using, not the fire pit, but we've been using the patio, and I'm not aware of anybody complaining about anything, about noise or whatever. And our in-guests love it, our restaurant guests love it. It's a great addition to the property. The HPC, was really happy that we were doing this. They had this concept of the building being too high on the hill, and the patio was going to draw it more into the public domain of the street, and everybody was happy. I was happy until I got a call from Skip and said, stop work.
So Jeff, are you serving dinner out there, or is it just for
Nah,
people to sit, they're
we-
just sitting around? Change your mind
We're just
about that?
sitting out there. It's the whole dinner thing with what's happened with restaurants, with help.
Yeah.
We can't even get the restaurant open 7 days a week because of help, so we're not serving any dinners out there now.
Can I ask a
Sir-
follow-up question?
oh,
to that?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, what time is your dinner service till, normally, just what time?
We take reservations in the summer from 5 to 10.
Okay, thanks.
Just as a quick follow-up question to Chairwoman Hutchinson's question to you, Mr. Unitas. The approval that you received back in May did allow for outdoor food service in this area,
Yeah.
correct? So it's conceivable that that may take place in the future, subject to the limitations in that ordinance, correct?
Yes, we would, like to have that option. And like some of you said before, there is a bug problem, and it's always something that, we have to deal with. But it certainly was a nice amenity, and the people that come in early, we're BYOB, they'll bring their bottle of wine, glass of wine, sit in a rocking chair, and, wait to be called for a table. And the in-guests love it. It gives them more of a place to sit in the evening, and it's really, it's lovely out there. You guys probably drive past the property all the time. It's landscaped immaculately. You can hear the ocean, the waves break, so the in-guests are really enjoying it also.
Jeff, to the point about landscaping, the area between the retaining wall and the start of the actual patio area, do you have landscaping
Yes.
that's been installed in that area? And to your eye, to the naked eye, to your eye, can you notice the deviation from
No.
what was approved by
No.
this board and what exists
We didn't even
currently?
know it was there until the surveyors ran the survey and told us we were 11 inches off. And I said, how can that be? I hired the best, right, Joe? And we were 11 inches off on 2 dimensions.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Granitis. Obviously, I have some testimony from Mr. Ross I'd like to elicit, but if the board has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this time.
I have some questions. Did you get HPC approval for that fire pit?
No.
HPC approval you obtained was for the actual patio area,
Yes.
correct?
Right, right. So they built the patio, and you put the fire pit in without having approval from this board, because I was the night that we came here.
That's-
And that was not on the original plans.
So that's not entirely accurate. The applicant didn't have the fire pit on the plans that were approved by this board, but the applicant did do what any individual is supposed to do when they intend to move forward with any kind of construction which may not comply with the zoning in that specific area. Mr. Granitis went to the officials who were charged by the city and employed by the city to provide that information and to review permits and to determine whether or not relief from the board is required. It's our belief that because the ordinance is silent with respect to fire pits, the zoning official reviewed the permit that was received and he signed off on all those permits. So Mr. Granitis relied upon the issuance of those permits in good faith to his detriment in some respects. And when he was advised that the zoning official had reconsidered his determination and that board approval was required, he stopped work and immediately filed this application to come before this board.
I've gone to the construction office, on several projects, and you get guidance from them. Edie will tell me, oh, no, you can't give me this yet until you go to HPC. We'd go to HPC, or, Lou would say you have to go to zoning and HPC. So we, just like any other time we've done that, we went in there and we looked for, guidance as to what we had to do. They accepted the applications for the permits, they issued them, and like I said, they inspected all the work also. So I don't want anybody to think that in any way, shape, or form that I tried to take a back door around something, because we don't do that.
And I did include in the application packet, the final application packets, I thought it was important to give the board members copies of the permits, so you all should have those in your application file as well. But I just think the distinction, it's important. This isn't a situation where we necessarily are coming to you asking for forgiveness as opposed to permission, which we all know we get that quite a bit. Somebody does something, they get caught, they come before this board and they say, it's already done, give me a pass, essentially. I think this is a little bit different because Mr. Granitis tried to do the right thing, tried to obtain the appropriate approvals, and unfortunately, it was discovered after the fact, or determined after the fact, that this board needed to weigh in on this, and that's why we're here.
I'm going to give everyone the same speech I always give. And this is king on zoning, but this is how I view it. I think it's irrelevant that it's been built. I don't think you should punish them for it, but you shouldn't give them a break for it either. It's not a zoning consideration. We don't do, estoppel. That's for courts. So, I mean, it's nice to know, and he's a member of a community, and part of his credibility as a witness is that he didn't try to do it sneaky. That's all fine, but that's not a zoning consideration. What you need to decide is if this deviation is such that it negatively impacts the zone plan and zoning ordinance, or if there's appropriate benefits, and the usual way. It is relevant, at least in my opinion, that this is a hole in the ordinance. We have the same thing in Westgate May. We're going through this now because you have houses that want to install a fire pit, and I have no idea, to be honest, if it really is an accessory use. It's not listed in the list of accessory uses, but it does seem like a structure, and it's kind of a use like a shed. Or a pool, it's a, entertainment structure. So it kind of is an accessory use, but it's the kind of thing that can get by a building your zoning official or your building official, and certainly can get by a homeowner or a business owner, because the word fire pit isn't in the ordinance. So if he had put a cement bench up there, that's the kind of thing that would have been administratively approved by Craig as part of an amendment to a site plan. If they had just, said, well, look, we want to put like a cement structure, we want to curve it in and make it a bench, Craig probably wouldn't make them get amended site plan approval. He could almost do that administratively. It happens sometimes. Not everything is built exactly the same. but this is a fire pit. So just do your weighing and decide if you think that the 11-inch deviation, remember, you've approved this before, so you recognize some benefits to this patio. So those benefits are kind of already in the mix. You thought it was a good idea once. Does the existence of this fire pit make that not a good idea anymore? So it's been in existence for a few months now. Well, not the fire pit, but the patio. And so that's the weighing analysis. Don't get too caught up in the estoppel. That's not your job.
Can I just ask one question of the board, Mr. King or Greg? The fire department, they're indicating that approved with the following conditions. The shut-off situation, since it is kind of on a public corner, would anyone be able to walk up and, I'm just asking, I don't even know if you know this, and just turn it on at any given time during the evening? Because it's out on a public corner? I mean, it's a beach in Trenton.
Can you answer that?
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to turn it on, but they would be able to turn it off.
Okay, all right, so, yeah. And that was just a more,
In a prominent position, so if something's going on, anybody can walk up.
I see. I just didn't know whether or not your staff or a member of your team would be responsible for making sure it was turned on and off at appropriate times and not left on, since it is on a sort of a public access. But that was, I understand that's not a zoning thing, but it's more of the location of it, and the placement of it is in a very public
You
location.
can turn it on at the inn, correct?
Yeah,
That's
we
what
have
a
to,
fire-
you have
the
to
way I
put
could read it,
something
that's
under it
what
and
that
light
said.
it and do that.
Okay.
But that's the emergency gas shut-off. If something's going
Right.
wrong, you want that to be obvious and have anybody
Can do it.
know to push the button. So
Yeah, I have two questions. One I'm going to reserve for Craig. It has to do with that. But the other one is, and I have the drawing here now, it's just an 11-inch encroachment upon this shrubbery here. In other words, if things had worked out right, this would have been 11 inches larger. Okay,
11 inches back
Okay.
from Trenton, 11 inches from beach.
from beach.
The
Okay.
other two sides are in their proper location.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Murray, the wall itself, which if you look at the other photograph, that's actually constructed in the and Mr. Ross will testify to this, but the wall is constructed in the location that was approved. It's that lip, that internal patio lip, which was expanded out 11 inches.
Okay, all right, thank you.
When you first applied, it first went to HPC, correct? And then it came to us. So HPC has not seen it with a fire
Fire
pit.
pit,
Why is it not to HPC first this time?
right.
Well, we were, obviously, we're in the middle of the summer, the season's ongoing. We thought we had the ability to operate this thing, so the first step was to file, because there's a notice of violation that's come along with this.
Oh, I-
The first step, or threatened to be filed if we didn't come before this board. So the first step was to address the relief. We were hoping we wouldn't have to go back to HPC under the circumstances, but, obviously, that's a conversation which we'll probably have to have with the city as opposed to.
We approve things subject to HPC approval all the time. I don't know, it wouldn't shock me, there was fire before there was light, so, but we'll see what it doesn't seem non-historic to have fire, but that's for the HPC. They may even approve that administratively, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yes, Joe Ross, we did get conceptual HPC approval before we came to zoning.
Tonight.
And we did go back for final HPC approval after zoning, but that was before construction. And this additional scope of work of a gas appliance came during the construction. So, but I don't want to make it seem as though we didn't get final HPC approval. But we haven't gotten final,
We haven't gotten final HPC approval
or
for
any
the fire pit.
HPC adjudication,
You
after the
understand that
fact.
any approval we give always has in it a condition.
Oh, absolutely.
You need all further approvals, and one of those will be the HPC, and how they approve it is up to them, whether they can do it administratively with the chairperson, or they can do it at a hearing. There's a standard for that, and they decide that, so.
Yeah, I like to just say that I thought that might be the case, and I shouldn't probably throw him under the bus, but I ran into Tom Carroll, and I explained what was going on, and I said, Tom, do we have to come back to the HPC first with this? He said to me, no, we work closely with the zoning board.
So if we have to go back before the board, we will, right? It's a conversation I anticipated having to have with the HBC board or with, realistically, likely the township, the city manager about some of the other issues which don't pertain to this board. But subject to any other required approvals, we understand that, and if the determination is made that HPC approval is required, we'll go in front of HPC.
Well, our conditional approval doesn't require them to come back. We always put the condition that, I mean, we approve something here, conditioned upon the fact that approved by the HPC. They don't have to come back after that, right? That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, so, okay.
Was there a question with HPC? I'm questioning the fact that you're going to putting a fire pit outside of a historical building. Is there a problem with that? I think the HPC needs to really make that decision.
They will. They will. They'll have to go back, they'll go to HPC. We're approving the structure. HPC will do, well, I just will consider it like a streetscape question or something, or the design of it, and maybe they'll say it's not done in historic design or something, but you're approving a structure into use, and they'll deal with the aesthetics of it all.
Right.
And it's interesting, because there are no real design features that touch on this specific element, this
Right.
type of accessory use. I would agree with you, Mr. King. I think it's more akin to an accessory use, but I'm curious to see how HPC will deal with it, because there are other elements of construction in the city of Cape May where you have explicit defined design features which you need to comply with. I've yet to find anything that would apply to this, but the board obviously can,
It's made out of the same materials the rest of the patio.
correct. Yeah,
Right.
brick, yep.
They're all HPC, selected and approved bricks, and we made the.
Yeah.
fire-
Well, that's their purview. They're going to take a look at that. That's not something that we do here. Yeah.
Understood.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. One is, when you came before us before and the resolution was approved in April, I think under the testimony that you gave is that you were going to have 44 seats out there to serve dinner, and you were going to eliminate the seats, if I remember correctly, on the dining area to the right as you're facing the building. So now what you're saying is you're not serving dinner out there. So you're going to retain the 80 seats inside?
Yes.
And they'll-
Nothing's
and-
changed, for the last,
And there'll be no dinner served out there?
not now, but if we
Well,
do, we will make that,
well,
that balance.
The question is, if you're going to serve out there, that's one thing, or you're going to serve inside, and it'll end up, and we all know there's more seats in restaurants in this town than authorized,
Right.
okay? Let's be honest about it. So,
Yeah,
okay, the second question I have for you, and this is really for Craig, have they met all the conditions of the resolution in April 21st?
With the construction,
Yeah, and what the
So-
things that had to be, our approval was conditioned upon a number of items.
right. So they complied and submitted a plan that complied with your conditions. So that plan was signed by everyone. That's when they started construction. They posted their guarantees, their inspection escrows. They started construction. There was no fire pit ever shown on those plans.
Right.
So that's when they started building that raised red flags, and that's why they're ended up here. And we explain that, why they're here. As far as, we have not done a final inspection to verify that they've complied with everything. I'm trying to figure out what your question is.
That's what I'm asking. Since it's been a year,
As of now, with the exception of the fire pit, I would venture a guess that they have,
Well,
with the exception of the size. The size got bigger, so, and encroached into the setbacks. So it's not uncommon for, when we get as-built surveys, to find setback encroachments, et cetera, before we'll issue recommendation to accept the improvements or sign off on the project, issue COs, et cetera. So it's not something out of the ordinary.
okay, another question I have for you is, you obviously signed a contract with a construction firm to build the patio, according to the stipulations of this board. And you submitted to us drawings
Right.
that had no fire pit shown, if you remember,
Right.
all the drawings. Who authorized the contractor to put a fire pit in?
Me. I asked the contractor to go to the city, and I just as it was being built, it was just an honest thing, and I said, hey, a fire pit would be nice out here, because honestly, I never saw us put it, once we got approval for 44 restaurant seats, I never really, once something actually goes from, you know, the visual to reality, I didn't see us putting 44 restaurant seats out there. So I said, maybe we can use the end of the patio, because it was approved for in amenities, and I looked at that as an in amenity. And I said, let's go down to City Hall and ask the people down there, can we put a fire pit in? And they said, yes. And they watched us build it, and they came and inspected it we didn't do, you know, we didn't try to hide this at all.
You're telling us that the construction office in this building said yes to putting a fire pit in?
Yes, sir.
Even though it wasn't
Had
on
all the
a,
permits.
If you go to the very last set of exhibits that I included with the application, I provided copies of all the permits that were issued to the applicant in connection
There
with
are 4 or
the fire
5
pit.
permits we had to get to put it in.
There was a building permit, a plumbing permit, an electrical permit, and a fire protection permit issued by the Construction and Zoning Office to allow the construction of this fire pit. And then after the fact, it was determined that approval from this board may be required, and Mr. Gurnitis stopped work, and we submitted this application for hopefully relief and approval tonight.
Fire pits are strange things. I mean, I have this exact table, I mean, it's not nearly as nice and it's half the size. I have one of these on my deck at my house that you can carry, and it's got, the propane tank goes inside it, and it lights up the rocks, and it sits on the back deck. And I don't need I don't need construction approval for that. It's half the size of this, and you can pick it up and move it. It's not, so this is a strange area of they could take one of them chimneys and put it out there, and they don't need a zoning permit for that. or
Oh, he's
construction
in
permit.
trouble.
Well, I'm just saying, you don't. I mean, we had this in Cape May because you had someone putting a barbecue pit, and they built it out of brick. And they could put a barbecue grill there, but they wanted to build a barbecue thing out of brick, like an outdoor kitchen, and that became a structure, and it required a zoning variance, and it was a big thing. So, but this is a structure, that's why it's to us, because it's a structure that's not on the site plan. So, you know, but it was an area intended for people to congregate. Now they're congregating with a fire pit instead of just congregating.
well, I think it was,
So,
I believe it was an area for serving food.
no,
Yeah, I think that was the testimony.
it was an area as an amenity at which they could serve food or not, and they could put the tables inside or outside. It was, from my recollection, and I was there, and was that there's 80 seats to this restaurant, they could have 20 out on that patio and 60 inside, or 44 outside and 36 inside. So they could do that, but so I don't know if they were required to serve dinner out there. I mean, does that answer, I mean, that's. my
Well,
understanding.
my impression was that we approved it because they wanted to have outdoor dining.
Then
There
take
was
them
some
on.
reference in the resolution, which talks about the 44 outdoor seats, that there are not going to be additional outdoor seats, and that there may be some combination, to Mr. King's point, of tables inside and outside, but the total seats on site, whether they're inside or outside, would be limited to
Or
no
80.
more than 80.
Right.
But we also, and I think it's in this letter, you know, we came and asked for permission to make it a dual-use patio, dining, and amenity for our in-guests. In fact, that's how it got to be the size it was, because there's a certain percentage that's allocated to the restaurant, and then there's another percentage that we could allocate to the in-rooms. And I very specifically, very clearly, when I was here last time, you know, said that we wanted to use it for both the in-guests to sit out there and for restaurant use.
Right, you said tables and chairs and umbrellas, but there was nothing about a fire pit. I was
No,
at
there's
that
nothing
meeting,
about a
yeah.
fire pit.
But he had permission, that's.
But- and again,
It seems like we're beating him up for something.
Right.
Yeah.
That he got permission for it,
Well, he did get permission for that, but not for putting a fire pit in there.
but he did get permission
All right, but let's not,
by the
look,
zoning, I mean, by the
it doesn't,
construction.
it's not a relevant consideration, okay? I mean, it's relevant if you're gonna assess his credibility on other issues and all that, but what you're trying to figure out, and this is up to you how you figure it out, is that you've previously approved this, that they could serve 44 customers out there dinner all night. That was approved.
Right.
And you found that the benefits of doing that outweighed any detriment. What I think you're now doing is deciding whether the fire pit alters that balance for you. That people sitting around the fire pit as opposed to having dinner out there has a larger negative impact that undoes the balancing act you did before. That's the analysis. Whether it was, even if it was constructed or wasn't constructed, it doesn't matter at all for the zoning analysis. Now, I have seen situations where, and I do think this is relevant, where if it's constructed and it's by accident and it's used for a while and it doesn't cause a problem, I've seen situations where that's relevant testimony, that the impact is not great. So sometimes that happens, okay? I've heard that happen. But for purposes of your analysis, you're looking at what was approved before. You know, you recall that this resolution speaks for itself about the benefits. You read those in there. So now you're just deciding if this having the fire pit alters that balance, and then you vote, okay?
I'd just like to say that when I was here last time and the resolution approved it, not only for a dining area, but it also approved it as an amenity area. You know, and on the original proposal, we did have rocking chairs out there, and I said that those rocking chairs, you know, would be most likely used by our in-guests. So along the way, and it entirely, you know, rests with me, I said, wouldn't it be nice to put a fire pit out there? I see fire pits, you know, around town. And I came down here and I said, tell me what I gotta do. And they gave me the permits that I had to fill out. We filled them out, we submitted them. They told me that, you know, how much each permit was gonna cost. We paid for those permits, and we were given one of those little yellow stickers, you know, to say, okay, go build your fire pit. And as soon as an issue came up, we stopped. You know, I could have connected it inside, nobody would have known, but we didn't. We stopped. You know, and here we are again. Anybody that's seen it, I personally think it looks spectacular. Came out better than I expected it to come out. The landscaping is spectacular. It fits with the building perfectly. You know, and this isn't gonna be a fire pit where people are gonna be playing beer bong around it. They're gonna be sitting, you know, in their rocking chairs. And again, to get on that patio, you have to have some kind of approval from us via a reservation.
Can I just clarify something I said before, because I want to address your question? All right. The thing that made this come before the board, aside from the setback stuff, because it's a corner and it's got 20 feet coming at it from both directions, was it was expanding a non-conforming use because of the area on which the restaurant is used, okay? So that the use of the seats is what triggers the variance concern, and that's why the seats were limited to having a certain number of seats outside for the restaurant and inside for the restaurant, not exceeding 80, okay? Whether you put a rocking chair out for people to sit in while they're waiting or to look at the sunset and all things, that's not the use that was driving the seats in this resolution. They were seats used for the restaurant, because you can't start blowing up the restaurant, because if you start putting a bunch of space outside, now that 25% for a restaurant starts getting blown up, okay? So when it's not being used as a restaurant, if there's rocking chairs there or something, that's not violating the spirit of that seat limitation, because that was seats used for the restaurant use, serving meals and stuff. So if they were serving meals to guests out there and had 80 seats inside, that would violate the condition of this ordinance. I don't believe that's what they're doing. I was there 2 weeks ago for dinner. That's not what they were doing. So, you know, I don't think that's what's happening, but I want to just address that so you understand that the use and the concept of the seats, that's what it was for. So,
Well, I'm anxious to hear from Craig as well, but it seems to me that if,
Call that a little bit further away from your face.
okay, how about that? Is that all right? Over there? If this was a portable fire pit, they wouldn't be here? Is that what I'm understanding? It's a structure.
They would still be here.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure, because it's a structure now, they're here.
Not for the fire.
but not for the fire pit, for the 11
For
inches.
the 11 inch.
For the 11 inches, but not for the fire pit. But the fire pit issue is, it's because it's a permanent structure there, that's why they're here. If they had something that was portable, somebody would wheel out a fire pit like Mr. King has in his yard, they wouldn't have to be here, is that right? Okay,
You have a structure in a front yard setback is what that fire pit variance is.
okay.
The actual fire pit's in the front, is in the,
It's in the front yard of Trenton Avenue.
Right.
It's
So if it was-
15.3.
If it was set back further,
what's a corner?
the fire pit really wouldn't be an issue,
It wouldn't be an issue.
Well,
unless
but it amends the site plan, so.
it does, right.
Okay.
That's why.
That's why I'm interested to hear what you have to say when your report's done.
There's a little bit of gray area, like Rich said. I mean, we've had this conversation about flagpoles. Flagpole's a structure, put in the front yard. There's a lot of people put flagpoles in the front yard, you know.
Trellises is another thing.
There's no mention of fire pits, so. But I do think in this case, it's a structure, it's in the front yard, and it doesn't meet the front yard setbacks.
Okay. So there's two issues. One is the encroachment, the 11-inch encroachment. The other is the structure of the fire pit that we're, okay.
Now, it's interesting because the structure, the fire pit structure, is 10 feet further away than other structures that are approved.
Or closer, yeah, that's correct, yep.
So it's
Yeah.
further away from the street, I mean, so it's interesting,
Okay.
but yes.
If the board has no further questions for Mr. Granitis, I can elicit some brief testimony from Mr. Ross relative to the conditions that were approved versus what exists. That's,
I'll be brief.
yeah.
But there has been obviously significant discussion about the fire pit, and as an interesting twist to how the story unfolded, that's exactly what revealed that there were 11-inch encroachments on the two other setbacks. In other words, when we became aware that we might need to come in front of this board for a setback variance for the fire pit, Jeff and I met on the site to preliminarily measure what that distance was off the property line, and that's when I was alerted to the fact that, hey, it looks to me like there's a little bit of an encroachment on the patio. So had this, and I say this just as an overall impression of the site, had we not been required to determine the fire pit, we wouldn't have had the surveyor come out and do an as-built to show that I was correct in that there was an 11-inch encroachment on the, because it looked so good and looked so accurate to the site plan. In reality, the surveyor determined that our initial impression from measuring to the fire pit actually showed the two encroachments that you're looking at on the 11 inches on the Trenton Avenue side and the Beach Avenue side. So that actually generated the need for these other two variances. In other words, we were approved for 7 feet on the Trenton Avenue side, and the survey, as-built survey, revealed that that's 6.1, which is 11 inches encroaching from what was approved. We initially had a 20-foot conforming front setback on Beach, and now we have, as a result of the construction, 19.1, or an 11-inch encroachment on the Beach Avenue. Visually, I measure things with my eyes every day. Visually, you didn't see that, but when we put a tape measure to it, we discovered, oh, you know, we have these two other encroachments that were caused by the contractor, who obviously wasn't as careful as he should have been with his measurements.
And Mr. Ross, the fire pit, so what's the dimension from the property line on Trenton Avenue to the fire pit?
So the Trenton Avenue to the fire pit is 15.3, which is essentially 15 feet, 3.5 inches, and where 20 feet is required. And the distance of the fire pit off of Beach is actually 24.5 feet, so that is beyond the 20-foot setback required on Beach. So the variance required for the fire pit relative to the setbacks is on the Trenton Avenue side, and we're seeking relief for 4.9 feet on that side.
And Mr. Ross, the location of the setback, or not, excuse me, the location of the retaining wall itself, that's not That's not impacted by the setback.
No, that is not included in the setback requirement so long as it is less than 2 feet high, and in most areas, it's like 18 inches, so it's well under the 2-foot requirement.
Now, this is a corner property. Do you believe that this expanded patio area will have any impact on the site triangle?
No, and again, I say that as a observer from the street, you wouldn't even be aware of that encroachment had we not done an as-built and determined that it was encroaching. And as far as the site triangle, we're nowhere near encroaching on the required site triangle for the corner.
And do you believe the relief that we're seeking here tonight presents any substantial detriments to the public good?
I don't. I don't believe it. I believe the changes are de minimis from the approved site plan.
And as you testified earlier, is that because to the naked eye, an individual wouldn't really be able to observe the deviation?
Correct. If we weren't discussing the fire pit at all, we probably wouldn't have discovered it ourselves, let alone, anybody in the municipality.
And do you believe that the relief we're seeking here tonight, if it were granted by this board, would impair the intent or purpose of the city's zone planners?
I do not believe that.
And is that because this is the C3 zone, which allows for these types of commercial uses?
That's correct.
Now, with respect to, we are asking for a D2 use variance, the expansion of a non-conforming use. I think we've touched on, while that's probably the least impactful component of this application, but do you believe this site can accommodate the expansion of this existing non-conforming use?
I do. I believe it can accommodate that and promotes the positive elements of the zoning ordinance. Again, it promotes free air, free light, is elevated a little bit higher, from a flood perspective, and I believe it's aesthetically very pleasing. I have not heard anything but positive remarks relative to the aesthetic beauty of it.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to your testimony, Mr. Ross?
No, I think I've covered sort of the technical aspects and the particular setback issues that we're facing, and again, I leave it to the board to deal with the greater issues of fire pits in the city.
That's the extent of the testimony and the questions that I had for Mr. Ross, but certainly if the board has questions, we're happy to answer them.
I just have a question for Craig. If they're not using it for restaurant seating, is this really an expansion of a non-conforming use?
If they're not using it for restaurant seating, but the approval is,
I understand that, but I'm reacting to the thing of, well, now they're saying they're not using it for seating.
well, I don't think they're rescinding their
No.
ability to use it for
They're
seating.
not. I'm just pointing out that actually, when they're not using it for the restaurant, but are using it simply as a sitting area for guests.
If they only were, they wouldn't be an expansion.
It wouldn't even, it would be eliminating
It would-
D variance.
The D variance would be eliminated.
I mean, I asked for the D2 variance and have an abundance of caution because of the fact that this was viewed as a pre-existing non-conforming use in connection with the prior application, and we felt that even though we weren't adding additional seats, we were adding another element. Let's ask for it just out of an
Well,
abundance of caution.
If COVID comes back in November,
I would leave it there.
that may, you may use that for outdoor dining.
Correct,
I
yeah.
don't want to, I wouldn't touch
Yeah,
that at all.
I've taken the position that they're still allowing them service to be out there, so that's an expansion. That restaurant use is non-conforming, and therefore that's an expansion.
Your analysis is absolutely right. I'm just addressing our friend's question over there was about whether they had to use the seating or not use seating. And I'm just pointing out that if they were to declare they weren't using that for seating, that actually would eliminate, in my opinion, the
D variance
D
would go
variance,
away.
because they wouldn't be
I-
expanding the use, they
I
would be,
concur with your
so.
opinion.
That's all. I think about these things.
I have a question. When you applied for your permit to build the fire pit, the position of the fire pit was told to the city? They knew it was encroaching on the setback?
I don't know.
I actually brought the approved plans here with me.
But the reason that is not surprising is that you had already approved the patio to go even closer to the road than the fire pit. So it was actually a structure that was further from the
wouldn't have
road than
been
that
on my
which you had
plan.
already approved.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was putting it inside the patio, you see, so that's how that got by them.
That was my understanding, that, you know, we were approved the space to do amenities on. And, yeah, a fire pit is more than a rocking chair, but it was, to me, it was still an amenity.
And you didn't do the as is site plan until after you were told to stop any further work?
Well, once this whole fire pit thing came up.
Sure, but
then
I think that you're trying to clarify. So construction and zoning may not necessarily have known that you had that 11-inch encroachment. Is that correct? You didn't resubmit.
Well, nobody knew it at that time.
That's, I think, I'm just trying to clarify.
The 11-inch.
Yeah, right? Is that what you're, yeah, so I think that's what, that was.
Came to knowledge when we had the as-built survey done
That's what I-
in anticipation of dealing with the fire pit.
I was just trying, I thought that was what your point.
I thought he was asking if they noticed that the fire pit was too close to the road.
No, I think it was more about wanting to understand, did they have a new plan
I-
showing?
Okay, well, he'll tell us.
The setback, I was more concerned about the setback to the street,
From what?
from Trenton, for the edge of the fire.
From
edge
the
of-
fire pit?
The fire pit.
Yeah, he was asking, he thinks that they should have caught that the fire pit was too close to
Should have,
Trenton.
they should have, yeah,
And I'm just saying the reason that they might not notice that is that it was within a patio that was already approved, that was already going closer to Trenton than the fire pit. Right? I think that's-
Yeah.
But
The
it-
ordinance is silent on the issue of fire pits too, which also
I
complicates
know,
it.
but it was amending a site plan too, so it's,
I get it.
again, I am just telling everyone, please don't vote based on whether you think the building department messed up or the applicant didn't tell the building department enough. That is not a zoning consideration. Please just base your vote on whether you think that having a fire pit there substantially alters the balance that was struck before when you permitted the patio with the outdoor 44 seats of dining out there. And if you think it does, then you're gonna vote your conscience. If you think it doesn't, then you'll vote your conscience that way. So that, to me, that's the zoning analysis. Okay, so really, is it, you know, in terms of the weighing that you did before, is having 44 people being served dinner out there for 6 hours that much different than having a fire pit with chairs around it? And you do that analysis, you may think it is, and that's what you guys vote. I don't vote, I don't get to vote. But from a zoning perspective, and the one that I have to defend in front of the Superior Court, to me, that is the zoning analysis. Now, if they were to lose this for some reason, they may go to Superior Court and say, wait a minute, we got approval for the zoning, this permit. It was an arguable position. We relied on the building department's analysis, and we built the pit. You can't make us undo it now. But that's for a judge to decide. That's not what we do. Okay, you're doing a zoning analysis. So I think I've laid out that analysis, and now you guys do the voting. I don't vote. Okay?
Thank you.
Craig, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I'll summarize my July 27th, 2022 memorandum. This is an application for amended site plan approval for preliminary and final, as well as the variances that I will go over. I did a completeness review on page 2 of 7 and 3 of 7, and those are from the checklist from the C and D variance, as well as for site plan approval. These were all supported the last time we heard this application. I believe that all of those waivers are justified, and that there is sufficient information here to review the application, so I did recommend deeming it complete. On page 3 of 7, I start the zoning requirement analysis, and that is essentially where I hash out how this is an existing non-conforming use. Tourist guest houses are permitted. You're allowed to uses that are permitted are allowed to have an incidental and accessory use, which the restaurant is. However, they're limited to 25% of the total floor area of the principal use, and in this case, that is an existing non-conforming situation. So anything that they expand, the last time they were here, they expanded a non-conforming use. That's what they're doing here tonight. Minimally, that patio area is expanding, so therefore, it represents a expansion of a non-conforming use. So that's the first variance, the D2 variance. The second variance, these are all for setbacks. The requirements from each setback line from both Beach Avenue and Trenton Avenue is 20 foot. Let's talk about the outdoor seating area, patio area. 20 foot is the requirement. It was originally approved at 7 feet. It was constructed at 6.1 feet. The outdoor seating patio along Beach Avenue was originally approved conforming at 20 feet. They're encroached. That setback is now 19.1 feet. And the fire pit is a structure, and there's nothing that prohibits a fire pit in our zoning code. There's nothing that even says fire pit in the zoning code. So it's not prohibited. I take it as a structure, and it has a setback requirement of 20 feet, where 15.3 feet is where it was constructed in relationship to Trenton Avenue. So those are the 4 variances that need to be addressed. Okay. On the general review comments, under item number 1, I identify there's been a change to the seating area. So now you have a fire pit out there. Mr. Ross's plans indicate that there are 7 tables of 4 seats, which is totals 28, and there's 5 seats around the fire pit totaling 33. Is that a proposed reduction in the limit of seats out there, or is that flexible? Are you still able to fit 44 seats out there?
If you remember on the zoning meeting, as the owner of Peter Shields, I never wanted 44 seats out there. Somehow that got into my previous attorney's paperwork. We never envisioned having any more than 34 seats out there. And if this labor shortage doesn't straighten itself out, we'll never have dinner out there.
Okay.
But to answer your question, the revision in the plans, it can accommodate what's shown. Just a rearrangement of the original layout.
So obviously, the fire pit's taking up room that otherwise you could be seating.
But relatively modest, the
Number of seats.
size of a big rocking chair
Well,
itself.
that may help your case with the saying we're
Reducing seats out.
We did have
losing the seats.
We did have rocking chairs on our original.
So if I were you, I'd be arguing the reduction of seats, the addition of a fire pit is less intense than what was approved at 44 seats, that, as a planner.
I don't care. No, we need more than 6 for seating area. We have 6 rocking chairs around the fireplace right now.
What would you be willing to offer as a compromise?
The immediate seating or the 6 rocking chairs. So you can't fit any more than 6 rocking chairs.
around the fire.
Well, but again, we're showing right now,
34 total seats. Right. Is it?
what's,
You know, we have some little benches out there. It's
I mean, I'm going to presume that if he's going to have 2 more, tables still staying under 44, he's going to remove 1 or 2 of the chairs, To me, the idea was that it'd be flexible so that he could accommodate, as long as he didn't overstep the limits of the conditions of the previous
So
approval.
leave the condition as the 80 seats.
Overall,
Overall.
absolutely. Am I misunderstanding that?
no, and in my
So you'd like to
what do you
retain
want to call it? In my naiveness, my ignorance about zoning, I was under the impression we approved a space that could be used for both the restaurant and for our in-guests, and that we limited the number of restaurant seats out there to 44, which, I never wanted to be that,
Right.
but that's what it got limited to. And that I could put some rocking chairs out there, some benches with cushions out there for people to sit on, whether they're waiting for dinner or the in-guests come out. It's a limited number of people. We only have 9 rooms. I mean, and, people don't want to sit out there when they have a reservation. They'll sit out there for 10 or 15 minutes waiting for their, waiting for their table to be available.
Well,
I just don't want anybody to think this is going to be like, I hate to use other places' names, but you know what I'm
Listen,
talking about.
we have to have a plan that's enforceable. So,
Can I have one moment? Could you
I
give us-
thought,
I mean, basically, what you're saying is, it's likely that if you have a fire pit there, you're not gonna be able
Not
to
gonna
have
have 44
44
tables.
seats out there.
Correct.
But that's fine. That means you're gonna have 36 and 38, or whatever the math is inside, 44 inside. So, I mean, it's,
right.
you know, but this board approved a 4 seat restaurant on this patio.
Right.
But
Now
doesn't
it's
mean
a-
he has to have them out there.
But it doesn't have to be there. So now the question is the fire pit make that use more intense such that it alters the balance that was struck previously?
Is it 44 plus a fire pit? Is it?
We
No,
would be,
I'm
we
sure
would be
they'll agree.
amenable to 44 seats, period. No more than 44 seats allowed out there. And if he puts 20 seats out there, so be it. The whole
No, I
site.
think what Craig is asking you to say is this. Now that there's a fire pit, would you agree to have no more than 34 seats out there? Which I
Yes,
think your client
agreed.
already testified is
Agreed,
what he wanted in the
under,
first place. So.
As a
the most
condition
that
of
could be-
approval, we'd
the
go
most
along
that could be out on that patio.
Thought I threw you a
Yeah, he
softball.
threw you something.
We went meandering down different paths, so.
So what he's saying is, you now will agree to only have 34
As a
seats up
condition of
there now that
approval,
there's a
yes.
fire pit there. So it's a less intense restaurant around the fire pit.
So maximum out there will be 34 plus a fire pit.
Yes, that's what I think he is agreed
Plus,
to.
And
some rocking
associated
chairs and,
seating around the
for,
fire pit.
Okay,
Wait, no,
34
no.
restaurant seats.
right.
I think that's fair.
Okay, I just want to make
That
sure
gives
we're
him some
specific.
flexibility if he has a rocking chair. It's it's obviously not a restaurant or a table seat in that
You're
situation.
not gonna fit 34 restaurant seats, waiters, waitresses, and seats.
And a rocking chair for a fire
If
pit.
you look at, if you went down, if we all got in the car and went down there right now, you'd see 8 restaurant seats down there that we've never used. Just to take up space because it's big and, you know, we've got some.
All right, listen, there can't be more than 44 seats for any purpose on that patio. How's that?
We're close to.
So if you're gonna put 10 restaurant seats, you can only have,
Yeah, 40, 34.
We're trying to regulate the use of the patio, you know, so like.
Makes sense.
It can't be 44 restaurant seats and 20 seats around the fire pit. I don't know how that would work, but I think that's what's going on, is they're seeing it kind of build. But you're saying that you don't intend to, your purpose isn't to intensify that area. So you want to have more than 44 seats for any purpose out there. Is that,
Well, yeah, listen to Craig. I mean, it's a less intense use when you're out there, yeah.
And we would even agree, 80 seats total, no more than 44 seats out there, 34 of which are limited to restaurant use. So I think that addresses that concern about overpacking that area, It reduces the number of tables, seats that would be permitted, and accommodates the additional space needed for the fire pit.
I think you have to explain the 80 seats is.
So that's
that
what
is
I-
what he pays for.
Correct. That's what we
he's
pulled
allowed to
out
have,
of-
And I think a lot of
Correct.
people don't understand that.
So-
You know, like each restaurant has specific number of seats that they're
Historically.
approved of.
Right, over the
Yeah,
years, there's
but I
been
think
80 out
that whole thing has gotten kind of.
I'll ask Mr.
pushed
Gurnitis
aside.
two questions real quick on that. How many seats are approved to operate in the Peter Steele's restaurant?
Mercantile license says 80 seats.
80 seats.
And
that's
it's your
it. That's
intention
his
to,
license.
well, you're limited to
We're not
80
changing
seats,
it.
and that's what
Right,
you're going to maintain.
exactly.
We,
Whether it's
and if
there or
you remember
whether
my
it's inside, that's
testimony from the first meeting, Peter Shields has a very small kitchen. There's no way we could put 40 seats out there or whatever and keep the restaurant in operation. It's,
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have a handle on the number.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to ask the plans be revised to show 44 seats for any purpose maximum, with 34 limited to restaurant use in the patio area.
No objection.
Okay? All right. Item number 2, you're going to be required to comply with the previous conditions of approval unless otherwise modified by this application. 3 is your standard requirement to comply with the acceptance of approval and inspections thereof. And it just notes that those improvements from the previous approval have not been accepted due to the changes sought by this application. 4, any approval is required conditioned on all other state, county, and local approvals. 5, which is important, the project is located in the historic district. HPC approval is required before we sign the plan. So you're going to have to go get that done, or get a note from them, letter from them indicating that they have no interest in that fire pit.
Understood.
And the applicant should be required to comply with any and all applicable affordable housing requirements at the time of approval or issuance of building permits. That's our standard condition. Just the fire department recommended approval with shut-offs for gas fire pit AC to be at unit, and also at the main building, they are to be, goodness gracious,
Clearly marked.
and clearly marked, yes. Okay, Public Works approved with no comments. Shade Tree Commission approved, no comments. So that's a summary of my report. I'm happy to answer any questions if I didn't capture those in my summary.
That's funny that he clearly marked. That's funny.
Very good.
No one else sees the irony in that.
Anybody else have any more questions? Craig's or the attorneys, architects? Nobody? All right, this time we'll open it to the public. Public. Anyone within 200 feet would like to speak? Beyond 200 feet, close to the public. Motion.
Okay. Well, there is one, nothing is ever easy. This has a D variance in it. I really think it's a very marginal D variance. It's expansion of a non-conforming use, and I will tell you, I'm not entirely clear how the use is expanding. It's the same number of restaurant seats, and that was what triggered the expansion, of making it a non-conforming use. So, but technically, the space is a little larger where restauranting might take place, and now there's a fire pit, which I guess some people would say would intensify the restaurant use. So it's an expansion of a non-conforming use, but it is a marginal one. But it does trigger a different voting requirement, okay? It requires approval by 5 out of 7 members. So as you're voting on this, please know that they need 5 yeses for this to be approved as a expansion of a non-conforming use. But I'm just giving everyone a heads up that I am not entirely comfortable that this is, remember, this is a D variance, not like a regular use variance, which is a very high standard, all right? Site suitability and all that. This is kind of the baby D variance. It's a baby D variance. It's the D variance says, it's called Coventry Square. It's expanding an existing non-conforming use. So it's whether the site can accommodate the expansion of this use. So, you know, it's within a patio that's already approved, so it's not adding any seats. So to say that it can't accommodate that expansion, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying you got to articulate your reasons why and do that. But it's not a traditional D1 variance. It's a very high standard. This is the smaller D variance.
Do you agree that this is an expansion of a non-conforming use?
I do technically, but it's very minimal, like Rich is
Okay, yeah,
emphasizing. And one thing I failed to mention, we look at whether the lot's overdeveloped, right? Floor area ratio is not really an issue here. Lot coverage, 75% is the maximum permitted. They were at 53.1%, they're at 55.9%. So that demonstrates that
It's not over.
with regards to coverage, there's not intensity of use that's overwhelming there. And there's a lot of green space on that front yard, even with that patio, so it kind of makes sense.
I also have some concerns about considering a fire pit, which is not mentioned in our ordinance at all, as an object, a use that triggers a non-conforming use. It's a structure, so I'm comfortable with the fact that it needs to structurally have a variance if it's too close to a side yard and all. But saying that it's a expansion of a non-conforming use when it's a use that wasn't even significant enough to mention in our ordinance, whereas pools and sheds and all these other things are in there, I'm just a little, it's not a big expansion. So to impose on them a 5 out of 7 standard, to me, makes me a little nervous in terms of defensibility on appeal, but I'm acknowledging that technically that is there. So
What are you saying, out of an abundance of caution, we should consider that issue?
we should, but to lose on a vote of 4-3, because it's expanding a non-conforming use, to me, is, you know, I need, if that's gonna happen, I need people to really carefully articulate why this site can't accommodate this fire pit, from a zoning consideration for a use that's not mentioned in our zoning ordinance, and you need to articulate that, and you can, but I'm just telling you, my job is to create a record that I can defend on appeal, so I need you to really articulate that, because this is a very marginal D variance. So the motion that I would recommend be made
real quick, I think I have something which Mr. Gonitis is willing to offer to the board, which may hopefully alleviate the D2 issue and potentially alleviate some of the concerns the board has.
I'm a little bit confused, but this 11-inch issue, I mean, we can remedy that. If you want us to remedy that.
I don't think the 11-inch issue is the concern. I think if anybody's, it's more about the fire pit. The 11 inches
But
is,
the 11-inch issue is the D variance. The D variance is the expansion of that patio. It got larger.
Because the two.
but it's the same number of seats. I get it, but
You know what I'm
I think you can make an argument both ways on this way. I agree with you, and that's why I advertised for it and asked for it out of an abundance
I
of
view
caution.
I view
The fire pit, I don't think, is the D variance.
well, okay.
We can
My
cut
opinion.
11 inches off those bricks. It's going to be dusty there.
Well, do that if you lose. I mean, I just, it's an 11-inch deviation. The testimony is that it's, the record that you have before you right now on the 11-inch issue, okay, is that no one saw it happening, all right? Their architect testified that visually it can't be discerned. It was only noticed when they were measuring the fire pit. There's been no statement by the public that the 11 inches has negatively impacted them. All right, and it's a patio. So it's not like they put a building 11 inches closer to a side yard. It's a patio that is how far off the ground?
Less than 2 feet.
Right, so to say that that 11 inches altered the prior balancing you did to permit it 11 inches back, you need to articulate why the 11 inches is that much worse than what was approved before. So you can do that. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that that's the standard you need to apply. So before he volunteers to destruct, $10,000 worth of brickwork, I think that's what you have to do if you lose. Okay, so I would,
We
it's up to you, but
That one I don't mind.
it's,
Okay, so out of an abundance of caution and fairness, we should consider this as an expansion of a non-conforming use and also, okay.
yes.
All right, got it.
So that's what you're asked to vote upon. So the motion is a motion to grant amended site plan, right?
Yep.
Says amended site plan,
Yes.
right? Amended site plan approval, preliminary and final, a C2 value for the 11-inch deviation, and depending whether you listen to me or Craig, a expansion of a non-conforming use because the patio is 11 inches larger or because you consider the fire pit an intensification of the outdoor restaurant area. As you're doing that, though, remember they've reduced the number of seats outside, and the restaurant use of it as a restaurant is what triggered the non-conforming use. So they've actually less intensified the use that triggered the variance in the first place. But that's for all of you to, you articulate your reasoning. So that's the motion that I'd recommend being made. We're doing it all together because it is all too intertwined not to.
I
and
agree.
It requires a vote of 5 out of 7 for the D variance. So that's the motion I recommend being made. Please articulate your reasons, particularly if you vote against, because there was no objector that presented contrary testimony, like an engineer or anything like that. So I can't just say, for the reasons, you can't adopt the reasoning of some expert that spoke against it. So you'd have to articulate your reasons against it, because otherwise I need the record, okay? So do that. I'm not trying to sway you, just do it.
So you want the motion?
Go, Bill.
Okay, I'll make the motion again as articulated by our counsel.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Murray, seconded by Mrs. McDade. Ms. Hessel?
Yes, and
Miss-
I want to say to you, Mr. Jonitis, that I appreciate your frankness and your honesty. Thank you.
Mr. Ledwin?
No.
Mrs. Notch?
No.
Mr. Walsh?
No.
Mrs. McDade?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mrs. Hutchinson?
Yes. I think it's a,
Can one of the no's articulate their reasons? Because right now I have no reasons. I need to have, it lost, so I need to have reasons.
I feel that it's too close to the side.
I'm sorry?
The ruling for the side setback is, it's just inside of that. That's, it's sort of black and white to me.
The fire pit being.
Fire pit.
proposed.
Fire pit's a structure. Today, it's a fire pit. Tomorrow, it's a pizza oven or whoever's going to be there. You know, we're all not going to be here long, but somebody's going to take this building over 10, 15 years down the road, and this is now an outside structure that's not supposed to be there.
Okay. Anything else?
I agree with Mr. Walsh.
Okay.
Members of the board, thank you for your time tonight.
All right, thank you.
No, it didn't pass. No.
You did 5.
Down.
At 3, it was 4th grade.
That is
See if it's actually just, no.
Oh, I missed that. Who the hell was it?
There's a real problem.
To me, it's an amenities guest or it's just, it's embarrassing. You were staying at that inn?
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Do you want to have discussion? Excuse me, everyone, your mics are on. Are we adjourned? Do we want to adjourn? Do you want to discuss? Do you want to have a discussion?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn. All in favor? Thank you. Mics off, please.